Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another week of the Sports Luck Podcast. Hope you guys are enjoying your week. My name is Ben Mosteller, if you don't know already. And today we will be breaking down the NFC East fantasy football predictions for you guys, let you know what teams I think have a chance to win the division and what guys I'm looking at or staying away from in fantasy football. If you haven't checked out already, all the other episodes are out on my YouTube, Sports Luck Podcast, or you can find it on Spotify at Sports Luck Podcast. We have done up until the NFC East. We only have one more division go, the NFC West, coming out next Tuesday, followed by some Sleepers Bust podcast, as well as a rankings and possibly a mock draft coming up here in the next couple weeks to get you prepared for the fantasy football season. I do the homework for you. So all you have to do is listen, and hopefully we will win you a league. So let's get started with those Dallas Cowboys winning the division last year at 12-5, and that was their best year since 2016. This was also their first division win since 2018. The Cowboys continue, though, to struggle in the playoffs. They get there, but they lose last year, losing in the wild card on that insane ending. And this year, they look to redeem themselves. And of course, the leader of the team, quarterback Dak Prescott, finished quarterback 7 in fantasy last year with just under 4,500 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, which was tied for fourth overall, and 10 touchdowns. So a pretty good season for Dak there. He doesn't really contribute in the running game anymore. He only had one touchdown, which was the lowest of his career. His rushing numbers have declined over the years. He's been more of a passer, but he still seems to get the job done. But it'd just be crazy to think if he had the running ability, which he really doesn't need because of his running backs. But if he did, he'd probably easily be a top 3 quarterback in fantasy. Now, Dak did have career highs in completion percentage, attempts, and touchdowns last year, which was a positive, a step in the right direction. This year, Dak will be without his number one wide receiver, Amari Cooper. There are also some other key injuries at wide receiver, which we'll get to. So the weapons aren't there like before. So he'll have to really throw the ball accurately to those receivers in order to keep up those fantasy numbers. But currently, Dak is going as the quarterback 6, which I think is pretty fair value. Quarterback 7 last year might be a little bit too high. He might be closer to the top 10, but definitely a top 10 quarterback. He's probably more of a QB, 7, 8. He does have that upside, but again, the concern at wide receiver depth, which wasn't always a strong suit there, but losing Amari Cooper, again, Michael Gallup hurt, and James Washington hurt. It's just going to be a little bit rougher for Dak this season, but he's definitely a good quarterback to get him there. So let's talk about the backfield of Ezekiel, Elliot, and Tony Pollard. So Elliott's been the guy and has been the guy. And people said that he had a down year last year. Well, his down year finished him running back 7. He's always been consistent. He's always been a top 12 running back in the NFL in fantasy since he started. Last year, he had over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, which was tied for fifth, and he had 2 receiving touchdowns on 47 receptions, which is really good numbers right there. But again, a down year because he didn't have flashy numbers. He didn't have big 20 plus fantasy games. He was consistent getting you, double digits, but nothing that was like insane, like 30 fantasy points. So that's why they said he had a down year. Pollard now, he finished running back 27, which is pretty good, 719 yards, but only 2 touchdowns. A lot of people are worried about Pollard taking a lot of the load and taking more carries away from Zeke this year, but Zeke's still the guy. And, they came out, the organization came out, Jerry Jones said that they want to use Zeke. Zeke is their guy. Pollard is one heck of a backup, and he will still produce numbers, fantasy relevant numbers, especially if Zeke gets hurt, but he still has his own value to bring to the table. Again, running back 27. So I'm still high on Zeke, right? He hasn't had outside of the top 12 at all. And you can always count on him getting close to 10 touchdowns and 1,000 rushing yards. Currently, though, Elliott is going as a running back 20 and Pollard the running back 31. So Zeke's a sleeper for me. I mean, he's going in the third, fourth round. I did a 10-team PPR drafting from spot 6 the other day, and I got him in the fourth round as my RB2. And I was really happy with that because he brings great value there. He could easily be a top 10 running back, as he has been pretty much every year. And they have the best offensive line in the league. So I think that he brings great value, as does Pollard, but especially Zeke, a steal at that ADP. So if I'm in the fourth round and I can grab Zeke, maybe the third, I'm looking elsewhere. But if he's there for the wraparound in the fourth round, I'm taking him all day as my RB2 because of that potential. High on Elliot this year, a lot of people low. But again, he's been consistent. And that's what I like in fantasy football. Somebody that can go get you those numbers year in and year out. And that's been Elliott. So their defense, phenomenal. So that means if the offense can score some touchdowns, the defense, can keep them up by big margins. They'll be running the ball more. And that's where Elliott is really beneficial, as well as in the passing game. 47 receptions last year. That should be around the same and possibly even improve due to the wide receiver struggles that they are having. Tongue twisted right there. But let's talk about those wide receivers. We're going to focus on CD Lamb because he's really the only fantasy relevant wide receiver right now. Lamb finished as a wide receiver 19 last year, 79 receptions, over 1,100 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Now he'll take over the wide receiver 1 with Amari Cooper gone and Michael Gallup behind him, hurt. James Washington, hurt. So, in my opinion, you give him 11 more receptions, 90 receptions, maybe 1,200 yards, and 2 more touchdowns. He would have finished as the wide receiver 9 last year if we added that. So, let's take a look at this year. Right now, his ADP is wide receiver 7, which I think is very fair for CD Lamb. But again, he's going to have a great start to the year. I could see it kind of die down towards the end of the year. If Gallup comes back, James Washington. But right off the bat, he's the guy. So CD Lamb's going to see a lot of targets. If you're doing daily fantasy, he's going to be one of the top wide receivers to start out the season. So definitely good value there at wide receiver 7. I do think he will be a top 10 wide receiver. Again, last year, wide receiver 19. But you take a look at what's happened to Dallas, and he's the guy. So I would draft him at that ADP. Again, you got to look around him, what wide receivers are going around him. I believe guys like Mike Evans is going around there, possibly Jalen Waddle. I like CD Lamb over him. He might be a little bit deeper. It just depends what rankings you're looking at. I look at ESPN, but definitely good value there. Should be a top 10 wide receiver for you in fantasy. Now, tight end Dalton Schultz is even more intriguing. He finished as a tight end 3 last year, right behind Andrews and Kelsey. He had 78 receptions, which was third best, 808 yards, sixth best, and he had 8 touchdowns, which was second best. Now, again, we have a shortage at wide receiver. So when we take a look at Schultz, we say that these numbers should be about the same this year. And there's nothing that I'm looking at saying that those are going to go down, if not possibly improve. I mean, those are pretty good numbers for a guy like Dalton Schultz. So I don't think there's much of a decrease, maybe 2, 3 less touchdowns. But he's a safe tight end that if you miss out on Kelsey and Andrews, I would wait to take, because right now he's going as a tight end 6, which is great value. Next week we're going to look at the NFC West, and of course Kittle's over there. So I don't know if I'd put Schultz ahead of him, but potentially could be ahead of Waller because of the additions of Devontae Adams there. Potentially he could be ahead of Pitts because of the poor quarterback play. So Dalton Schultz, another safe guy that I really like here on this Dallas offense that can bring you some value at the tight end 6 position. Now, their defense was number 1 last year, so draft them. The pros are that great defense carries this team, which is great. They have a great offense, but the issue is the injury concerns on the offense. And can they get over that hump? So last year, they go 12-5. And, every week I start recording this and I keep forgetting to add in, if you're watching on YouTube, I created a PowerPoint that has the records on it. And I always say how I predict last year. Well, I always forget to put it in, but that's all right. We have it up here. The Dallas Cowboys, I predicted that they would go 9-8. So they did much better than the 9-8. Good for them. And the Cowboys look to win the division again. Now we'll move on to a very, very worst team in the New York Giants, who went 4-13 last season, and that was their worst season since 2017. They're looking to improve this season. Daniel Jones isn't the guy, but he is the guy that the Giants are going with. He played in 11 games last year, finishing fantasy 26 with about 2,500 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He also added 2 rushing touchdowns for almost 300 yards, with those 300 yards were 10th best out of quarterbacks in rushing. Jones has not been the guys, like I said, he's consistently missed games every year, and he's not a guy that you can trust getting you good fantasy numbers. Right now, he's going as a quarterback 20, which I think is fair. Again, 26 in missing 6 games. So you give him those numbers, he probably would have finished close to quarterback 20, but maybe it's a little too high. There's other guys deep down there that I might take a risk on that are somewhere in the lower 20 range. But Daniel Jones is going to be around quarterback 20. Not a guy I would even want as a backup. And unless you're a Giants fan, I don't think you'll be drafting him in fantasy either. Running back Saquon Barkley. I mean, he's their saving grace, the only hope on the team. But ever since his rookie here, he has just struggled, whether it's with injury or, of course, because of their poor offensive line that they try to improve every year. Last year, he was running back 29 with only 593 yards and 4 total touchdowns. Now, we know what Barkley can be and what he can do, as he has been a top 5 running back in the past. But the question is, how much can he do? Give him maybe 400 more yards, 8 total touchdowns, probably a fair number. He would have finished running back 14 last year. And coincidentally, right now he's being drafted as a running back 15. So if he's healthy, I think he could be around the top 10. But it's just very interesting. Saquon Barkley, can he get there? He's probably the biggest risk reward player because he has the ability to be a top 5 running back in fantasy. But the last few years, he's struggled with injury. The offensive line is so bad that it's made it tough for him to get there. Right now, he's going around guys like J.K. Dobbins, who's coming off that ACL injury from last year, and David Montgomery. So depending on who you like more over them, J.K. Dobbins, it's really tough for him coming off that injury to say that I'd like him more than Saquon. But Dobbins did have a great rookie season, as did Saquon. David Montgomery, he's been consistent the last 2 years, so I might slightly favor him over Barkley. But again, Montgomery, in my opinion, doesn't have that top 5 potential this season where Saquon could. So depending on how you're drafting, who you draft first, Saquon Barkley might be a pretty good risk reward player to take at running back 15. Now, the wide receivers were awful last year, and a lot because they suffered with injuries. Kenny Golladay, the wide receiver one there, last year was only wide receiver 72. Kadarius Toney, he played in only 10 games, 420 yards, 39 receptions. We also have Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton. Now, these guys, they have some depth here. They do have depth, but they're kind of just average guys. I wouldn't consider any of these guys this year in drafting. Right now, Toney, wide receiver 43. I know a lot of people are saying he's a sleeper if he stays healthy. He could be. Kenny Golladay, wide receiver 52. They also drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver 80, and Sterling Shepard, wide receiver 81. Now, another thing to look at is if Daniel Jones has maybe 15, 20 touchdown passes, let's say 20 at best, then all of these guys have to split the touchdowns. And you also have to counter in Saquon Barkley catching some passes out of the backfield and potentially scoring 3 or 4 touchdowns. So maybe the top guy scores 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. You got to look at that. The receptions aren't going to be as high. So a lot of these guys, in my opinion, don't really bring any fantasy value to you this season. At their price, maybe the best would be Kenny Golladay at wide receiver 52. But other than that, I'm not really looking to draft any of these guys. I'd probably reach around them to grab somebody else. Now, the tight end situation, they have Daniel Bellinger. He was a rookie out of San Diego State who was just okay in college. He has a good size, but not fantasy relevant, going as tight end 37. The defense, terrible, but some pros. If healthy, Saquon Barkley can lead the team. He can maybe get them a few wins, and they have good wide receiver depth. Cons, they have a bad defense and just overall a pretty bad, rough team there. So last year I said they would go, or I should say last year they go 4-13. I projected that the Giants would go 4-13. So how about that? I was spot on with the Giants. This year, I think they go one worse at 3-14. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the league, potentially picking first next year in fantasy, or not in fantasy drafts, but in real life in the NFL draft. Philadelphia Eagles are an exciting team this year. They finished 9-8, and they were second in the division. Now we have Jalen Hurts in his third year, his second year truly starting, and new additions to the team, including wide receiver A.J. Brown, who we'll get to shortly. So they are intriguing, and let's talk about Jalen Hurts. Last year, quarterback 9 with just over 3,000 passing yards, so not impressive there. 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So if you take a look at that, you're like, boy, he's not that good. But this is where Jalen brings you fantasy value. 784 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, both ranked first out of quarterbacks. I think this year, Hurts will try to pass the ball a little bit more. The rushing numbers come down a little bit more, closer to 600. And his rushing touchdowns not so close to 10, but maybe 6 or 7. With that being said, though, I think he can still be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy with the addition of A.J. Brown. Another target that he can throw to. Philadelphia struggled with their wide receivers in past years. So that'll help him pass the ball more, which brings him even more fantasy relevance. Right now, he's going as a quarterback 7, which I think is great value for a guy who should continue to improve. Again, this will be his second true season starting. This will be his third year in the league, or fourth year in the league now. So Jalen Hurts, he's a guy that I would be intrigued in drafting and probably could get for a decent price in an auction league who could have that top 5 upside. Running back Miles Sanders, he's not been good. Not as good as people hoped in Philadelphia or in fantasy in general. He only played in 12 games last season. And the year prior to last year, he couldn't even find the end zone. Hurts, obviously, and jokingly saying Hurts Sanders' rushing ability because of Hurts' rushing ability. I think Sanders, obviously last year's 0 touchdowns, but I think you give him 5 touchdowns this year, it makes him running back 25, and right now the ADP is running back 24, which isn't terrible. It's good value if you would add those touchdowns for him this year, which I think he'll get there. But not a guy I'm excited to draft. ADP is fair. If you want to take a chance on him, I was going to say flyer, go for it. But last year was just very disappointing. So I think that's kind of his floor. I think he has a higher ceiling, but I'm not so high on it to say he'll finish much better than the RB20. And that's mainly because of Jalen Hurts' rushing ability. So we talked about A.J. Brown coming over from the Tennessee Titans. He was traded in the draft this year. Brown had an off year last year, but is still capable of putting up 1,000 yards and 68 touchdowns. Wide receiver 32 last year, 63 receptions, right under 900 yards and 5 touchdowns. They also have Devonta Smith, who they got last year, finished wide receiver 30, 64 receptions, 916 yards and 5 touchdowns. So very similar numbers between the two. I think both men will be closer to 75 receptions and 1,000 yards this season, with maybe a few more touchdowns, which puts Brown at wide receiver 23 and Smith at wide receiver 26. Now, the ADP on Brown is a lot higher than what I think. Right now, he's going as the wide receiver 14. He definitely has the potential to get there, but I think that's a little bit too high. His best season in, I believe, was maybe 2 years ago in Tennessee, or it could be three, was wide receiver 8, I believe. So again, he can get there, but Jalen Hurts isn't as good as a passer as Ryan Tannehill because of the rushing ability, of course, and just that Tannehill's been in the league and he's a better pocket passer. So that's why I'm a little concerned putting him at wide receiver 14. I would lean more towards wide receiver 18 to 20. That's probably where I would draft him. But Smith, I think they're a little bit too low on. He's going around guys like Rashad Bateman and Juju, though. So Juju probably is the number one in Kansas City, and Rashad Bateman is the clear number one in Baltimore. So if you want to take a wide receiver 2 in Smith over wide receiver 1s and Juju and Rashad Bateman, that's kind of what you're going to have to be stuck with. So that's why kind of the wide receiver 36 is kind of a little bit low, but the guys that are going around, they all have potential to rise. So, possibly drafting these guys, but not guys I'm like excited and looking to draft. Dallas Goedert could be a guy that I'd be excited to draft. Finished tight end 8 last year, 56 receptions, 780 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Besides, the 2 touchdowns, I think that can improve this year and maybe get closer to 4 touchdowns. Right now, his ADP is tight end 8, which is good value for him. That's where he finished last year. And again, another tight end that you can kind of wait back on if you miss out on some of the top guys. So their defense, they're just average. They try to improve it in the draft. Hopefully they'll be better. The pros are that Hurts has another weapon. He's got another season to start. So there should be improvement there on that offense, especially in the passing game. And the cons are that they just kind of have an average defense. And besides Hurts, the running game's pretty poor. Last year, they go 9-8 in the division. And I projected that they would go 8-9. So not too far off there. So this year, what do I say? Well, I think they go 11-6. I think that they tie the Cowboys in record, and I don't know how to break down, but I think you put the money on the Eagles to win the division, you get a better price for it than putting the money on the Cowboys. Again, a good shot to win the division. The Eagles have more to improve than the Cowboys do, but the Cowboys, the wide receiver core is going to maybe hurt them this year, which means maybe they'll lose another game or two. So there's upside there with the Eagles taking them to win the division, and it'll definitely be between the Cowboys and the Eagles to win it all this year. Not win it all, but win the division. Now, the Commanders, Washington Commanders, former Redskins and football team, they went 7-10 last year and have won 7 games in 4 of the last 5 seasons. So 7-9, 7-9, and then I think they were like 8-8 or something like that, and then they go 7-10. So they are the 7-win guys. And this year they upgrade to Carson Wentz at quarterback. I don't know how much of an upgrade you can say it is, but last year he finished as a quarterback 13 with the Colts with just over 3,500 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Besides a poor year in Philadelphia 2 years ago, where he was the majority of his career, he's a guy that'll get you 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That's what he's been averaging. Wentz will look to continue on that pace this year. And right now they have him at quarterback 21, which is great value if you can get him there. He definitely has that upside to finish in the top 15. I think he's closer to around quarterback 18. I personally am not drafting him in fantasy, but potentially waiver wire pickup if a quarterback gets hurt, or somebody may draft him. If not, watch out for him on waivers. He could be a good plug and play 1 week. Running back Antonio Gibson, he's intriguing. He had a great rookie season in 2017 or not 2017, I apologize, in 2020 with 11 touchdowns, and he followed up last year with 10 touchdowns total and over 1,000 yards. This was best for running back 10 last year. And then Gibson, he kind of fell off at the end of the season. He was doing much better till the end. So it hurt if you had him for fantasy playoffs. Currently, his ADP is running back 22, which he finished running back 12 and 21 and running back 10 and 22. So, or I'm sorry, in 20, he was running back 12. And last year in 21, he's running back 10. If you're looking at the slides, I apologize. That is inaccurate. I have 21 and 22, but he hasn't done the 22 season yet. This is great value for him, though, at running back 22, because his worst finish was running back 12. I do see him finishing closer to maybe RB 15 to 20. So if you can get him at RB 22, that's good value. He's kind of going outside of guys like Saquon Barkley, J.K. Dobbins, uh, Ezekiel Elliott, Josh Jacobs. So there's some value there for this guy. Very consistent right there. And he does have some pass catching ability, which we saw what Wentz did with Jonathan Taylor. This could be like that with Antonio Gibson this year. Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 1, finished wide receiver 25 last year with 77 receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. McLaurin has been pretty consistent over his 3-year career so far, getting you 1,000 yards and around 5 touchdowns. This season, he'll be getting more looks with Wentz, in my opinion, a better consistent quarterback, and easily, again, a guy to get 1,000 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns, and about 85 receptions. So you're looking at wide receiver 17 with that improvement from last year. McLaurin, very fair ADP, I think, potentially could finish closer to the top 25 this year. Dotson could be a late sleeper. They also have Curtis Samuel. McLaurin right now, wide receiver 16, which I think is fair. Dotson, wide receiver 57. So Terry McLaurin could be a breakout this season. Again, not a guy that I'm like, oh, I really want Terry McLaurin, but if he's on the board at that ADP, he might be a guy that I look to get, or potentially for a cheap price in an auction league. Lastly, tight end Logan Thomas. He's going to start the season on the PUP list because of a knee injury last year that cost him the season. So we do not know when he'll return. John Bates will be the starter. He really doesn't have any fantasy value there. And Thomas right now is going tight end 21, which, might not be a bad pick, or wait on waivers for him because he's a talented tight end. And, if he at least gets you half a season, he might be a good late season pickup. The defense, they're average. They were good a few years ago, but now they're just average. The pros are that they have a quarterback upgrade, and the cons are that they just have an average overall team. Last year, they go 7-10, and I projected that they would go 10-7. So flip that around. This year, I think they go 6-11. They go one game worse. They kind of have a tough schedule, and I think some of those games might surprise you that they might lose, like to the Lions and one to the Giants. So that kind of hurts them there. But other than that, that is the NFC East. Always a competitive and kind of a bad way division. But there could be some sparks with the Eagles this year to compete with the Cowboys. Definitely some players that are undervalued, in my opinion, coming out of the NFC East this year. Guys like Antonio Gibson, Ezekiel Elliott. So there's some value there you can get in later rounds that could give you the potential to easily be a RB1 on your team or be a top 10 running back, either of those guys. So some interesting value there. We'll see how the NFC East plays out. So next week we will end the divisions. I can't believe we're already at the 8 weeks with the NFC West, which is another very interesting, intriguing division, including the Super Bowl champs from last year. And then the following weeks will be the fun times where we talk about sleepers and busts, as well as doing a rankings and possibly a mock draft. So if you're not following already, go over to my Instagram at Sports Lock Podcast, and you'll be notified when the episodes come up on Tuesday nights, as well as on Spotify. You can listen if you don't want to look at the PowerPoints at Sports Lock Podcast, YouTube Sports Lock Podcast. Love the support if you give me a like on this video, as well as subscribe to the channel. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and I will be back next Tuesday to talk about the NFC West. Have a good one.